My name is Ryskina, and today I'll present our work that shows that language models align with brain regions that represent concepts across modalities. Concepts are considered a key unit of human cognition, and the question of whether language models can represent conceptual meaning has long been of interest to scientists in different fields. On the theoretical side, there are opinions of both ends of the spectrum with strong intuitions and much back and forth between them. But in terms of empirical evidence, we now know that language models can capture relationships between visual concepts like colors from text only. Models trained on only text or only images have been found to independently converge on similar representations, to the extent that it's been posited that what these models learn is a shared statistical model of reality, just in different projections. Another piece of evidence that fits into this is the growing body of work that shows similarities between representations learned by artificial neural models and representations estimated from brain activity, with some work in particular showing that model representations converge not only with each other, but with the brain as well. The work on measuring alignment between models and brains usually extracts the brain-side representations from established networks of brain regions. And those networks are often modality specific. So if we're looking for a representation of a text input, we would use the language network. If it's images, you would use the visual cortex, etc. But if we wanted to extract representations of concepts that are not tied to any particular modality, there isn't a network of concept processing regions that we could use for that. How the human brain represents concepts is still an open question. Francisco Pereira and colleagues had actually collected a data set that targets conceptual representations in the brain. So they started with a list of 180 concept words, which could be different parts of speech. And for each word, they created stimuli that represented those concepts in 3 different formats they call paradigms. The first is a sentence with the concept word. The second is a picture labeled with the concept word. And the third is a word cloud in which the concept word is surrounded by other related words. And those stimuli were created for each concept in the list. They actually created several stimuli for each paradigm, but I'm only showing one example here for each. And then they were shown to participants, and participants were asked specifically to think about the meaning of the sentence or picture or word cloud in the context of the highlighted concept word. And while they were doing that, their brain responses were recorded using fMRI. So the full data set contains for each participant brain activations for 4 to 6 stimuli sentences, pictures, and word clouds per concept. And the way fMRI works is it records changes in blood flow across the brain at the time of viewing a stimulus. And for that, the brain is discretized into a grid of small units of volume called voxels. And for each voxel, we have 1 activation value per stimulus. Now for every voxel, we can aggregate those activations within a paradigm. And here I'm starting with sentences. The goal here is to have a vector of activations with 180 elements, each corresponding to 1 concept. Since there are multiple sentences for each concept, we average the activations over them, and then we do the same for pictures and for word clouds. And now we have a vector for each paradigm, and we can compute pairwise correlations between them. And finally, we average these correlations to obtain one final value, which we call semantic consistency. It shows how consistent a voxel's response to concepts is across paradigms. So semantic consistency is high for voxels that respond strongly to the same concept, regardless of which modality, which paradigm it's presented in. When we look for where the voxels with statistically significant semantic consistency are, we find that they are concentrated in the left hemisphere. And when we threshold this map using an anatomical segmentation of a brain cortex, we end up with these 3 regions of interest, or ROIs. I'm showing them in different colors. And these are regions where these semantically consistent voxels are concentrated, and we think this is a good proxy for the hypothetical concept representation network. Generally, one should be cautious with claims about what a particular brain area does, but I wanted to give a little bit of context from prior work in neuroscience here. So these red areas I'm showing are roughly where the language network is found in most people. So one of our regions overlaps with those, and one is adjacent. And the occipitotemporal cortex, known to be involved in visual processing, overlaps with our third region. So now that we know which regions we will be looking at, we can start comparing them against language models. And for that, we have two methods, and the first one is brain encoding. Given a stimulus, we extract its representation from the language model and from the brain in the form of activations, and then we fit a ridge regression model to predict brain activations from language model representations. On the language model side, we compare 15 transformer models that we chose specifically to look for correlations with known factors like scale within the same family, effect of instruction tuning, or multimodality, where we compare vision language models with just their base language counterparts. And for each model, we run cross-validation to choose the layer and token pooling method that yields the best predictive performance. We start by predicting brain activations across the whole brain. So each point on this plot is a piece of the anatomical segmentation that I've shown earlier. The y-axis shows the correlation between the predicted activations and the ground truth ones. This is how we evaluate brain encoding. And we report mean performance across all models because in this experiment they were actually very, very similar. X-axis shows semantic consistency, and you can see that predictive performance is correlated with it. And that actually holds for all three of our paradigms. So brain areas with higher semantic consistency are better predicted by language models. The only outlier is this cluster of areas I'm highlighting. Those are all areas of the visual cortex, so of course they're good at representing pictures, but not necessarily cross-modal meaning. Then we zoom in on our three regions, and here, because of the potential overlap with the language network, we want to see if this predictive performance is actually driven by semantic consistency or by how much an area responds to language. And by response to language, I mean a measure from prior work in neuroscience where you compare how strongly an area gets activated by sentences as compared to lists of made-up non-words. So to do this in a controlled way, we split all the voxels in each of our rows into quartiles. So each voxel falls into a bin from 1 to 4 based on how high its semantic consistency is. And then another bin from 1 to 4 based on how high its language response is. So voxels are now grouped by Cartesian products of these two sets of quartiles. And then we hold one of the variables fixed and vary the other and see how predictive performance changes across quartiles. So here each row of plots corresponds to one region, and the x-axis is quartile by semantic consistency. And each line corresponds to a language response quartile. So we're varying semantic consistency while holding language fixed. And for all of our rows, for all paradigms, the lines go up. There is a strong correlation between predictivity and consistency. But when we do the opposite, we fix consistency and we vary language response, the correlation is less conclusive, especially if you compare to what we just saw for semantic consistency. And it's especially noticeable for the third region here, which shows no correlation with language at all. You can see that all the blue lines are kind of flat. And in fact, this region does not really respond to language at all. It is not a language processing region. So semantic consistency correlates with predictivity even when it's decoupled from language. And our second method is representational similarity analysis, where we take all the stimuli from all three paradigms and we average their representations separately in the model and in the brain to get a single representation per concept on either side. We can then compute how dissimilar each pair of concepts is in the model and in the brain, and finally correlate those distance matrices to measure how alike the representational geometries of the two spaces are. Here again, each row corresponds to a brain region and each pair of bars to a particular model. The gray bars show the baseline where we randomly shuffle the ordering of the concepts on the brain side, so they're not matched with the language model side. And in all three regions, the actual correlation is actually significantly greater than this randomized baseline. All the models I'm showing here are text only, so we can only use text stimuli, sentences, and word clouds. But for vision language models, we look at two settings, text only for fair comparison with unimodal ones, and one where we use both text and images. And the results with both text and images, here shown by the lighter bar, tend to be higher than with text only, shown by the darker bar. There are some differences between models, but they're not very prominent, and we didn't find that they correlate with model size or instruction tuning, which were both shown in prior work to be factors that contribute to model brain alignment. And we also find that multimodal models in the text-only setting perform comparably to their language-only counterparts. So to sum up, we introduced a new fMRI-based measure of semantic consistency. We used it to find brain regions that represent concepts consistently across modalities. We used two methods for this analysis, brain encoding, which is prediction-based, and RSA, which measures alignment of representational spaces. We find that encoding performance strongly correlates with semantic consistency, even in regions with low response to language. And we find significant representational similarity between models and semantically consistent brain regions, which in vision language models further increases when both images and text are used. And together, we think this can be viewed as evidence for the model's ability to capture cross-modal conceptual meaning. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions.